Episode 1. The Creation of the World. Genesis 1-2. Imagine nothing. Not darkness, not silence, not emptiness. Because even darkness is already something. Even silence is the absence of sound, which means there is space. Space in which sound has nothing to fill. Even emptiness is a place that can be filled. No. Imagine the state before all of that. Before space. Before time. Before the very concept of before. That is where this story begins. And it is from this point, from absolute nothingness, that the Bible opens its very first page. The first words ever written about the beginning of all that exists are simple and at the same time thunderous. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's it. One sentence, and already a universe. But what exactly was there at the very beginning? What would an observer have seen if they could have stood at the threshold of the first moment? The Bible describes it this way. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Hovering. In the original language, this word carries the image of a bird hovering over its nest, trembling above something not yet born, but about to come into being. This is not a static picture, it is anticipation. It is the moment before the first breath, the silence before the first word. And then the word came. The first day. Let there be light. 3 words, and there was light. Not gradually, not slowly kindling from some distant point. It simply was. Where only a moment before there had been absolute, tangible darkness, light broke forth. And God saw that the light was good. Then came what the Bible calls a separation. God divided the light from the darkness. The light he called day, the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Pause for a moment and consider this. There is no sun yet. No stars, not a single planet in the familiar sense, and yet there is light. And already there is a rhythm, evening and morning, as if the very structure of time is beginning to take shape, to find its form, to build a framework upon which everything else will rest. The second day. On the second day, God made an expanse. The expanse was a space that divided the waters. Some waters remained below, others were lifted above, and between them, a vast open space which God called the sky. Picture this moment. A boundless, dark mass of water suddenly parts, opens up. Between 2 layers of water, air appears, space, height, the depth of the sky. That very sky into which billions of people would gaze for thousands of years to come and never cease to wonder at its endlessness. And there was evening, and there was morning. The third day. On the third day, God turned to the waters below. "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And the waters obeyed. They gathered, they pulled back, and where before there had been only a formless expanse of water, the earth rose up from the deep, solid, real. God called the dry land earth, and the gathered waters he called seas, and he saw that it was good. But the third day was not finished yet. God commanded the earth to bring forth vegetation, and the earth brought it forth. Grass began to push through the soil, then plants bearing seeds, then trees bearing fruit, each according to its kind, each carrying within itself the seed for the continuation of life. Picture this moment: a freshly exposed, bare, lifeless earth, and suddenly it begins to turn green. At first, tentatively, with the first shoots, the first leaves, then denser, brighter. Trees reach upward, grass covers the hills, flowers open in air where a bee has never yet hummed, because there are no bees yet. But the flowers are already there. And there was evening, and there was morning. The fourth day. 3 days had passed. There was light, there was sky, there was earth covered in green, and yet the heavens were empty. Each evening darkness came the same, faceless, nameless. Each morning light returned, but without a source, without a face. On the fourth day, that changed. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens." And they appeared. 2 great lights, the greater to rule the day and the lesser to rule the night, the sun and the moon, and with them the stars. The stars. In one word, almost in passing, and suddenly the sky was filled with what billions of people would spend millennia counting, studying, navigating by, and weaving into legend. A countless multitude of fires scattered across the dark dome of night. God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth, to separate the day from the night, to serve as signs for seasons, for days, for years. And there was evening, and there was morning. The fifth day. The sky was ready. The earth was ready. The seas were full of water, but all of it was still silent. No movement, no sound. Not a single living creature in the water. Not one bird in the air. On the fifth day, the silence was broken. "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth." And the water came to life. Out of its depths, living creatures began to appear. Great sea creatures, the Bible calls them great sea monsters, cut through the water. Fish of every kind and size filled the seas. And above the surface of those suddenly living, churning, glittering waters, birds rose into the air. The first beating of wings in the history of the world. God blessed them. "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning. The sixth day, Part 1. On the sixth day came the turn of the earth. God commanded it to bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth. And the earth brought them forth, Animals came from it, all those we know, wild and tame, great and small, swift and slow, each according to its kind. The earth, so recently bare and empty, was now filled with life at every turn. Something moved through the grass, something wandered among the trees. Birds called out from the branches, fish splashed in the rivers. The world was almost ready. Almost. The sixth day, Part 2. The Human Being. And here the Bible pauses. Before this, everything had been created by a word, swiftly, authoritatively, finally. Let there be, and it was. But before God created man, something unusual appears in the text. What sounds is not a command, but a deliberation, a reflection, a decision made with particular weight. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let us make, not let there be, not simply a word cast into the void, but a decision turned inward, as though this moment carries a particular significance, a particular solemnity. And God created man. But how? The second chapter of Genesis opens the details. God formed man of dust from the ground, and then he did something he had done with no other creature. He leaned down, if one can say such a thing of God, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. Not merely another animal, not simply another being among the rest, made in the image of God, carrying within himself the very breath of God. This was a fundamentally different kind of creature, and the Bible makes that clear in everything it says from this point forward. God blessed the man, gave him dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over every living thing, appointed him keeper and steward over all the earth. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Not simply good, as had been said of the other days, very good. With man in the picture, the image was complete, and there was evening, and there was morning. The seventh day. On the seventh day, God finished his work, and he rested. This is an important moment, easy to pass over. God did not rest because he was tired. That is not the idea. The Bible says he rested from all his work. He stopped. And this day, the day of stopping, the day of rest, God blessed and made holy. He set it apart from all other days, made it distinct. The seventh day became a day carrying something sacred within it from the very beginning of the world. The garden in the east. But the story of the first days does not end there. God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he placed the man he had formed. Picture this garden. The Bible says, God made to spring up out of the ground every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. Not a desert, not a field, not a plain, but a garden. A place made with care and beauty. A place where every tree at once delights the eye and provides nourishment. In the middle of the garden grew two particular trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Garden. A river flowed through the garden, going out from Eden and dividing into 4 branches. The first was the Pishon, which flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there was gold. The second was the Gihon, which flowed around the whole land of Cush. The third was the Hiddekel, that is, the Tigris, flowing east of Assyria. And the fourth was the Euphrates. Names we know, rivers that exist to this day, places that can be found on a map. A story that unfolds not in the clouds or in abstraction, but on real ground under a real sky. God placed the man in this garden to work it and keep it, and he gave him a commandment. You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. One restriction, one boundary, everything else open and available. The man alone. And here God speaks words that, for the first time in Genesis, sound like something that needs to be addressed. It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. Not good. Up to this point, every day of creation had ended the same way. And God saw that it was good. Light, good. Earth, good. Plants, good. Animals, good. And now, for the first time, something that is not good. The man is alone. God brought before the man every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, so that the man could name them. And the man gave a name to every living creature. This is a remarkable moment, the first act of human creativity, the first expression of reason. He names the world around him, assigns words, brings order. But among all living creatures, no helper fit for the man was found. The creation of woman. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, God took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And from that rib he built a woman, and he brought her to the man. And the man, seeing her, said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." The first words one human being ever spoke to another, the first recognition, the first meeting of two people in the history of the world. The Bible says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And both of them were naked, and were not ashamed. Not because they did not understand, but because they did not yet know what would come later. Because the world was still whole, unclouded, clean. Because between them and God, between them and each other, nothing stood. No fear, no shame, no concealment. This was the beginning, a pure, open, good beginning. 6 days, from nothing to a whole world, from absolute emptiness to sky and earth, seas and rivers, trees and animals, to the first man and the first woman in a garden where everything is good and everything is open. This is the first story of the Bible. It does not attempt to explain the mechanics. It does not offer chemical formulas or physics equations. It speaks of something else entirely, that behind all of this, the sky above, the ground beneath, the air in your lungs, there is a source, there is a beginning. there is one who said, "Let there be," and it was. And that same one who created the stars with a single word leaned down to a handful of dust and breathed life into it. It is from this point that everything that follows begins. Episode 2. The Fall. Genesis 2-3. The garden was everything. That is not a poetic exaggeration. It is simply what the text shows us. Every tree pleasant to the eye, every tree good for food, a river running through the middle of it, branching into 4 great waterways that reached across the known world, animals walking without fear, air that had never carried anything but bird song and the rustling of leaves. And in the middle of all of it, 2 people, the man and the woman, naked and unashamed. Think about what that means for a moment. No walls between them, no pretending, no performance, nothing to hide and no reason to hide it. They stood before each other and before God exactly as they were, and it was enough. More than enough. It was good. This was the world as it was made to be. But the 3rd chapter of Genesis begins with a single sentence that shifts everything. One sentence, and the air in the garden changes. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. The serpent. He came to the woman, not with fire, not with open menace, not with anything that would have made her step back or raise her guard. He came with a question, calm, curious, almost innocent, the kind of question that sounds like conversation. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? Notice what he did there. He did not say, "God told you not to eat anything, didn't he?" He said it as a question, and not just any question, a slightly distorted one. God had said they could eat from every tree except one. The serpent reframed it as a near total prohibition, as if God had said, "Nothing is yours." It was a small shift, almost unnoticeable, but it planted a seed. The woman answered him, and her answer was accurate. "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" She knew the commandment. She stated it clearly. The boundary was real, and she understood it. And the serpent looked at her and said, "You will not surely die." A direct contradiction. 4 words against the word of God. And then he kept going. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is the heart of what he offered. Not just fruit, not just a taste of something forbidden. He offered an explanation, a reason why the boundary existed. He told her that the commandment was not protection, it was limitation, that God was withholding something from her, that on the other side of that boundary was not death, but knowledge, not danger, but elevation. You will be like God. The moment. The woman looked at the tree. The Bible records her observation with quiet precision. She saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, that it was desirable to make one wise. 3 things, each one true in its own way. The tree was real, the fruit was real, and the promise of wisdom, that too was real, in the sense that what followed did change something in them. The serpent had not lied about everything. He had taken something true and wrapped it around something that was not. She took of its fruit, and she ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. There is no dramatic pause in the text at this moment, no thunderclap, no visible change in the sky. The words move quickly, almost matter-of-factly. She took, she ate, she gave, he ate. 4 actions, and with those 4 actions, everything that follows in the entire Bible is set in motion. Eyes opened. Then the eyes of both were opened. This is what the serpent had promised, and it happened. Their eyes were opened. But the first thing those newly opened eyes saw was themselves, and they were ashamed. The nakedness that had been natural, simple, entirely untroubling, suddenly became something to be covered. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. The first human craft recorded after the fall is not a building, not a tool, not a work of art. It is a hiding place, something to conceal what they had become aware of. Something had changed, not in their bodies, in themselves, in the space between them, in the space between them and God. They had wanted to know good and evil. Now they knew, and the first piece of that knowledge was this: they were exposed, vulnerable, no longer whole in the way they had been. And so they covered themselves with leaves and waited. They did not have to wait long. The sound in the garden. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. In the cool of the day, in that quiet hour when the heat of the afternoon settles and the air softens. The hour when a person might walk slowly, without urgency, through a familiar place. God was walking in the garden, and the man and the woman hid. They hid themselves among the trees. Think about that image for a moment. 2 people crouching behind trees in a garden that God Himself had planted, in which every tree had grown at His command, trying to hide from the one who made the trees. There is something almost unbearably human about it, the impulse to disappear, to not be seen, to hope somehow that the problem will resolve itself if we just stay very still. And then God called. "Where are you?" Not because He did not know. God does not ask questions out of ignorance. He asks them to give the person a chance to speak, to come forward, to say what has happened. And the man answered from wherever he was hiding, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." 3 things in one sentence: fear, exposure, hiding. The entire anatomy of shame laid bare in a handful of words. Before the fall, the man had walked in the garden without fear. Now his first response to God's presence was to run from it. God asked him, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" The unraveling. What followed was the first instance of something that would repeat itself throughout human history: the shifting of blame. The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate." She gave me. The woman you gave me. Two deflections in one breath, away from himself and toward the woman, and then quietly, almost beneath the surface, toward God himself. The woman you gave me. As if the real problem was the gift. God turned to the woman. "What is this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." She too pointed away, down the chain, the man to the woman to the serpent. And the serpent had no one left to blame. The judgments. God spoke to each of them in turn. To the serpent first. "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." And then something more, a declaration that reached far beyond the serpent in that garden on that day. "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." 2 strikes, one to the heel, one to the head, a wound, and a fatal wound. The serpent's victory in the garden was real, but it was not final. Then God turned to the woman. "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." The intimacy that had been simple and equal would now carry the weight of struggle. The most fundamental act of human continuation, bringing new life into the world, would be marked by pain. And then to the man, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." The ground itself, the earth from which the man had been formed, the garden that had given food freely, was now changed. It would still yield food, but not without struggle, not without sweat, not without the constant, patient, exhausting labor of hands and back and years. And at the end of all that labor, the ground would take him back, dust to dust. Death had entered the story. A name and a coat. Before they were sent away, 2 things happened. The man gave the woman a name. He called her Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Even at this moment, standing in the wreckage of what had just happened, he named her not for what had been lost, but for what would come from her. Life. All life. And God, and this detail is worth sitting with, made garments of skin for the man and for his wife, and clothed them. He covered them. The fig leaves they had sewn together in their panic and shame, those were replaced. God took the covering into his own hands. Something died to make those garments. The first death in the text of the Bible is not a punishment handed down in anger. It is the provision of a covering for people who were ashamed.
But they could not stay. God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever."
The sentence ends without completing itself in the text. The action follows immediately.
Therefore the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken.
Sent him out.
And then, to make sure there was no return, God placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim, and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life.
The garden was closed. The man and the woman walked out into a world that was still real, still solid, still full of the rivers and trees and sky that God had made. But something was different now, in the deepest possible way. They were east of Eden, on the outside of the boundary, with a flaming sword between them and the life they had known. They had wanted to know good and evil. Now they knew. They walked east. The ground was the same ground. The sky was the same sky. The trees, the rivers, the birds, all still there. And yet none of it was the same. Something had shifted that could not be unshifted. They carried it with them, not in their hands, not in their bodies, but somewhere deeper, in the place where shame lives, in the place where fear had moved in, where there had only ever been openness. Think about that walk for a moment. What did they say to each other? Did they speak at all? Did either of them look back? And that promise, spoken quietly, almost underneath the judgment, "He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Did they understand what it meant? Did they hold on to it in the days that followed, when the ground pushed back thorns instead of fruit? Was the serpent wrong about everything, or only about the most important thing?
The garden is behind them now, but the story is only beginning. Adam and Eve will have 2 sons, 2 brothers, born into a world their parents changed forever. Both will bring an offering before God. One will be accepted, one will not. And what happens next between those 2 brothers, somewhere east of Eden, will be the first act of violence in human history. The garden was gone, not erased, just closed. Somewhere behind them, east of where they now stood, the cherubim still kept their post, and the flaming sword still turned. But Adam and Eve had moved on. They had no choice but to move on. The world outside the garden was real, and it was waiting, and it did not pause for grief. And life continued. The most ordinary, extraordinary thing happened. Eve conceived, and she bore a son. She named him Cain, and when he was born, she said something remarkable. She said, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." Her first words after her first child. Not a cry of pain, though there had been pain. God had promised that. Not a complaint, but a statement of something she recognized in that moment holding this new life in her arms for the first time, that she had not done this alone. Then she bore another son. His name was Abel. 2 brothers, born into the same family, the same world, the same sky, and yet, from the very beginning, they were not the same.
2 brothers, 2 paths.
Abel became a keeper of sheep. Cain became a worker of the ground. That is all the Bible tells us about their early lives. 2 sentences, 2 vocations. One tended animals, watching them, feeding them, learning the rhythms of living creatures. The other worked the earth. The same earth God had cursed, the same ground that now pushed back with thorns and thistles, demanding sweat and patience and years. Think about what that means for Cain. Every day he worked the very ground that bore the mark of his parents' failure. Every thorn that pricked his hands was a reminder of what had been lost. Every seed he planted went into soil that had been told to resist him. We don't know how many years passed. The Bible doesn't say, but at some point, in the course of time, as the text puts it, both brothers brought an offering to God.
The offerings. Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. 2 offerings, one from the soil, one from the flock. And then the Bible says something that changes everything. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. God accepted Abel's offering. He did not accept Cain's. The text does not explain exactly why in this passage, it simply states it. And in that silence, in that gap between what happened and why, generations of readers have sat and wondered. Was it the nature of the offering? Was it the heart behind it? Abel brought the firstborn, the best, the first, before anything else was taken. Was Cain's offering merely what was left over? Was it given with the same care, the same intention? We are not told. But God saw something in the one that he did not see in the other, and Cain knew. The face that fell. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. Anger, and something beneath the anger, something heavier. Disappointment, humiliation. The particular pain of being the one not chosen when someone standing right next to you was. And God came to Cain, not in judgment, not yet, but with a question, and then with a warning that is one of the most striking passages in all of Genesis. Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Sin is crouching at the door. The image is of an animal, a predator, low to the ground, patient, waiting, not forcing its way in, just crouching there at the threshold, watching, waiting for the door to open. God told Cain directly, "It is there. You can see it, and you can master it. The choice is still yours." This is what makes what happens next so heavy. The field. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. We are not told what he said.
The conversation is missing from the text, and the silence where those words should be is louder than anything that could fill it. Whatever was said or not said, this is what followed. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. That is the entire sentence. No slow build, no drawn-out confrontation, one sentence, and the first murder in human history is over. A field somewhere east of Eden, 2 brothers, and then only one. Abel, whose name in Hebrew carries the meaning of breath, of vapor, of something fleeting, was gone. The one whose offering had been accepted, the shepherd, the younger son, gone. And the ground that Cain had worked all his life received his brother's blood. "Where is your brother?" Then God came to Cain and asked a question. "Where is Abel, your brother?" The same kind of question he had asked Cain's father in the garden. "Where are you?" Not a question of ignorance, a question that opens a door, giving the person a chance to step through it honestly. Cain did not step through it. He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" 2 lies folded into each other. He knew exactly where Abel was, and the question thrown back, "Am I my brother's keeper?" was not really a question. It was a wall. It was a refusal. It was the sound of a door being slammed shut on the possibility of honesty.
And God said to him, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." The blood had a voice. Abel was gone, but something of him remained, crying out from the soil that had absorbed him. The earth itself was a witness. And God continued, "And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." The ground, the very thing Cain had devoted his life to, would give him nothing more. The farmer who had spent his years coaxing life from the soil would now wander across it, homeless, a stranger to the earth he had known. The mark. And Cain said to God, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." There is something unexpected in this moment. Cain, who had just killed his brother without recorded hesitation, now feared for his own life. The man who had not kept his brother was now afraid no one would keep him. And God responded, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him 7-fold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would attack him. What the mark was, the Bible does not say. It has been debated and imagined for thousands of years, but whatever it was, its purpose was protection. The man who had just committed the first murder was sent away, but sent away with a mark that said, "Do not touch him." Even here, in this darkest moment, something of mercy moved. East of Eden, again. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord
and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. East of Eden, again. The same direction his parents had walked when the garden closed behind them. As if every act of departure in this story moves the same way, further from the beginning, further from the garden, further from what had been. The land of Nod. The name itself in Hebrew comes from the same root as the word for wandering. He settled in the land of wandering. The fugitive made a home in homelessness. And life continued. Cain knew his wife. She conceived and bore a son. Cities were built. Generations passed. The world filled with people. All of them descendants of a man and a woman who had walked out of a garden, and their son who had walked away from the presence of God.
And yet,
back at the beginning of this chapter, before the offerings, before the field, before any of it, there is one more son born to Adam and Eve. His name was Seth. And when he was born, Eve said, "God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him." Another offspring instead of Abel. Life continuing. The thread not broken.
sit with this story for a moment before sleep comes. Two brothers, the same parents, the same world, the same God. And yet something in the space between them became a chasm that could not be crossed. Was it jealousy that killed Abel? Or something older and quieter? The slow accumulation of feeling unseen, unaccepted, passed over. God warned Cain before anything happened. The door was still open. Sin was crouching, but it had not yet entered. What would have happened if Cain had simply asked why? And that question God left hanging in the air. Am I my brother's keeper? It never really got an answer. Or maybe the whole rest of the Bible is the answer. In the next episode, the world has kept filling with people. Generations upon generations, spreading east, spreading outward. But something else has been spreading too. And God looks down at what the earth has become and grieves. One man finds favor. One man in an entire world that has turned away. And God speaks to him about a boat. Time had passed, more time than we can easily hold in our minds. Generations had come and gone since the garden closed behind Adam and Eve, since Cain had walked east into the land of wandering, since Abel's blood had cried out from the ground. The world had kept moving, the way the world always does, filling itself with people, with noise, with life, and with something else. The Bible does not describe it slowly or gently. It states it plainly, and the plainness of it is what makes it land so heavily. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Every intention, only evil continually. Not some people, some of the time. Not a general tendency towards selfishness that occasionally flared into something worse. The earth had filled with violence. The text says so directly. God looked at the earth, and it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted their way upon it.
And then the Bible says something that stops you in your tracks. Something that does not sound like what you might expect from the God who spoke light into existence and called it good. Something that sounds, in the most unexpected way, deeply human. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Grieved him to his heart. The God who had leaned over the dust and breathed life into it, who had planted the garden and walked through it in the cool of the day, now looked at what that life had become and grieved. The word the original language uses here is one of the heaviest words available. Not disappointment from a distance, grief from the inside. The kind of pain that comes from caring deeply about something that has gone terribly wrong. This is where the story of Noah begins. Not with a boat, not with animals, but with grief. One man. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. One word in the middle of all that darkness. But. In a world where every intention of every heart was only evil continually, there was one man who found favor. The Bible tells us three things about him. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation, and he walked with God. Walked with God. The same phrase used earlier for Enoch, who lived before Noah, and of whom the Bible says simply that he walked with God, and then was not, for God took him. To walk with God in a generation that had turned entirely away from him was not a small thing. It was the thing that set Noah apart. Not wealth, not power, not influence. Just this. He walked with God while everyone around him walked away. Noah had 3 sons. Their names were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And one day, in whatever ordinary moment it happened, during whatever ordinary task Noah was doing, God spoke to him. The instruction. I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And then the instruction that followed those words was unlike anything any human being had ever been asked to do before. God told Noah to build an ark. Not a boat in the way we might casually picture one. The dimensions God gave were staggering. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. Depending on the length of the cubit used, this is a vessel somewhere around 130 to 150 meters in length, with 3 decks, rooms throughout, a door in the side, a window, covered inside and out with pitch to make it watertight. God told Noah exactly what was coming. He would bring a flood of waters over the earth to destroy all flesh in which was the breath of life. Everything on the earth would die. But with Noah, God said, I will establish my covenant. That word, covenant, appears here for the first time in the Bible, a formal, binding agreement between God and a human being. You will go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives, and you will bring 2 of every living thing, male and female, to keep them alive. Every kind of bird, every kind of animal, every kind of creeping thing. and bring food for all of them. The scale of what was being asked is almost impossible to take in. Noah was being told to build a structure of enormous size, gather representatives of every living creature, load enough food for all of them, and prepare for a flood that would cover the entire earth, something that had never happened before and that no one alive had ever seen or imagined. And Noah did this. The Bible says it simply, Noah did all that God commanded him. Not a word of protest, not a question about the timeline, not a request for clarification on the logistics. He did all that God commanded him. The loading. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. 7 days before the waters began, God spoke to him again. "Come into the ark," he said, "you and all your household. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded. Picture the scene in those 7 days. The loading of the ark, animals coming 2 by 2 in a procession that would have been unlike anything the eye had ever witnessed before or since, great and small, swift and slow, predator and prey, all of them entering the ark and taking their place. The noise of it, the smell of it, the sheer improbable reality of it. And the people outside going about their lives, unaware or unwilling to believe, or simply too absorbed in the ordinary business of living to pay attention to one old man and his enormous wooden structure and the strange parade of creatures filing into it. Noah was 600 years and 7 days old when the door closed. The Bible says it quietly, "And the Lord shut him in." Not Noah, not Noah's sons, the Lord shut him in. As if the closing of that door was something that God himself needed to do, sealing in what would be preserved, sealing out what would not. The rain. On the 17th day of the 2nd month, it began. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. 2 things at once, from below and from above. The deep cracking open, water surging upward from beneath the earth, and the sky releasing what it held. Rain falling in a way that rain had never fallen before. For 40 days and 40 nights the water came. Think about what 40 days and 40 nights of rain sounds like from inside a wooden vessel. The constant percussion of it against the roof, the way it would have built from the first hours into something overwhelming, something that pressed in on every side as the water rose around them. The sounds of the animals, the voices of his family, and outside, silence gradually, as the world that had been was covered. The waters increased and lifted the ark above the earth, and it rose, higher and higher as the flood covered the hills, then the mountains. Every high mountain under the whole heaven was covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. Everything died. Birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming creature and every person, everything in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, everything on dry land. The world that had been was gone beneath the water. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. The waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days.
The waiting. And then the Bible says something beautiful in its simplicity. But God remembered Noah. In the middle of all that water, in the silence of a world covered and still, God remembered Noah, and every living thing, and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep were closed. The windows of the heavens were restrained. The rain was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth gradually, over a long stretch of days. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to abate until the 10th month. On the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen.
And Noah waited. He was not hasty. He had waited inside that ark while the world was unmade around him. He could wait a little longer, to be sure. After 40 days, he opened the window of the ark and sent out a raven. It flew back and forth until the waters dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. He put out his hand and took her, and brought her back into the ark. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, and she came back in the evening. In her beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. An olive leaf, green and living, pulled from a tree that was standing again above the waterline. A small thing, a single leaf, that carried in it the weight of an entire world beginning again. Noah knew then that the waters had subsided from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent out the dove again. And this time, she did not return. Dry ground. On the first day of the 1st month of Noah's 601st year, the waters were dried from off the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked out. The face of the ground was dry. After all the rain, after all the water, after all the waiting, he looked out at a world washed clean. Ground that had been covered for the better part of a year, now dry again under an open sky. No more constant sound of water, just stillness and light, and the earth beginning again. God spoke to Noah. "Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." And Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, and every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth by their kinds went out of the ark. Imagine that moment. After more than a year inside that vessel, stepping out onto solid, dry ground, feeling it beneath your feet, breathing open air that wasn't shared with hundreds of animals in an enclosed space,
looking at a sky that wasn't pouring rain, looking at a world that was empty and silent and new.
The first thing Noah did. The first thing Noah did when he stepped onto dry ground was build an altar. He took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Not shelter, not food, not rest. The first act on dry ground was worship, and the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. And the Bible records what God said, not to Noah, but as it were within himself, in words that carry the weight of everything that had just happened. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. An acknowledgement of something that had not changed. The human heart was still what it was. The flood had not fixed that. And yet, the decision that followed was not another flood. It was a promise. Seed time and harvest, summer and winter, day and night. The rhythms of the earth would not be broken again.
The covenant and the rainbow. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons. Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. A covenant, the same word from before, a binding, formal, unbreakable promise. But this time it was not just with Noah, it was with every living creature, with the birds, with the animals, with the earth itself. A covenant so wide that nothing breathing was left outside it. And then God gave a sign. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant. The rainbow. Every time clouds gathered and rain fell and the light broke through the water in the air and the colors appeared, God said, I will see it. I will remember. The bow in the cloud was not primarily a sign for people to look at and feel reassured, though it was that too. God said, when I see it, I will remember my covenant. The rainbow was a reminder to God, set in the sky, permanent, belonging to every generation that would ever come after. God looked at the world he had made and grieved, not from a distance, from the inside. And yet, when it was over, when the waters pulled back and Noah stepped onto dry ground, the first thing he did was not build shelter, not search for food. He built an altar. What does it mean that after everything, after the flood, after the silence, after a year inside that ark, his first instinct was worship? And that rainbow, still appearing in the sky thousands of years later, God said, when I see it, I will remember, not you, me. A reminder he set for himself. Does it look the same to you now? Next episode,
One language, one people, one impossible idea. The descendants of Noah look up at the sky and decide to build something that reaches it. A tower so tall it would touch the face of God himself. What happens when all of humanity is united and uses that unity to challenge heaven? There is something quietly remarkable about the world that existed after the flood. Think about what it was. One family. 8 people who had stepped off a wooden boat onto ground that was still drying, into a world that had been completely emptied and completely refilled with silence. Noah and his wife, Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives. 8 people standing on the mountains of Ararat with a rainbow overhead and the smell of fresh earth all around them, and the whole world stretched out before them like an open hand. From those 8 people, the earth filled again. The 10th chapter of Genesis traces it in extraordinary detail. The sons of Noah and their sons after them, spreading outward across the known world, each name becoming a people, each people finding a territory, each territory becoming a nation. The Table of Nations, as scholars call it. 70 nations in total, branching out from 3 men who had once stood together on a boat. It is one of the most remarkable genealogies ever written, and hidden inside it, almost in passing, is a detail about one particular descendant of Noah, a man named Nimrod. The Bible calls him a mighty hunter before the Lord. It says he was the first to be a mighty man on the earth, and it lists the beginning of his kingdom: Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Babel, in the land of Shinar. Remember that name, because the next chapter of Genesis takes us there, and what happens in that place will change the shape of human history forever. One language. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. That is the opening sentence of Genesis 11. Simple, almost casual, and yet everything that follows depends on it. One language, the same words. Try to hold that in your imagination for a moment. Every person on earth, every trader and farmer and shepherd and builder, every mother calling her child, and every elder telling a story around a fire, all of them reaching for the same sounds, the same words, the same structures of meaning. There was no barrier of translation, no moment of confusion at a border, no foreign tongue that needed decoding. A man from one end of the known world could walk to the other end and speak and be understood completely. What that means for human cooperation is almost impossible to overstate. Language is the architecture of thought. When people share a language, they share not just words, but the entire framework through which they understand the world, the concepts, the categories, the way of organizing reality into meaning. One language meant one shared framework. One shared framework meant that any idea one person could conceive, any other person could grasp immediately, without friction, without loss in translation. The possibilities were, quite literally, unlimited. And the people knew it. The journey east. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They were moving, the descendants of Noah, spreading across the earth as God had commanded. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And in the course of that spreading, a group of them came to a plain, not mountains, not a valley cut by rivers, a plain, flat, open, stretching in every direction. The land of Shinar, which we know today by another name, Mesopotamia. The region between the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the same rivers that had been named in the Garden of Eden. Fertile ground, good ground, the kind of ground that rewards the people who settle it. And they settled there. They looked at each other across that flat and open plain, and they made a decision not to keep moving, not to keep spreading, which was what God had told them to do. To stop, to stay, to build. What came next began, as so many momentous things do, with a conversation. The idea. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Notice what the Bible records first. Not the grand vision, not the ambition, the technology. Bricks. Fired bricks, hardened in kilns until they were as strong as stone. And bitumen, the thick, black, waterproof substance that could bind those bricks together into structures that would last. In a region where natural stone was scarce, this was a significant innovation. You did not need mountains to quarry. You needed clay and fire and time. And those they had in abundance. The technology was ready. And then came the vision. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Two things. A city, a permanent settlement, a place that would anchor them to this plain and to each other. And a tower. Not just any tower, but one whose top reached the heavens. A structure so tall it would touch the sky itself. And a reason. Two reasons, actually, folded into one sentence. The first, let us make a name for ourselves. Fame, legacy, the kind of permanence that outlasts a human life. The kind that says, we were here, we built this, remember us. The second, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. This is the one that carries the most weight. God had told them to fill the earth, to spread out, and they were afraid of exactly that. The city and the tower were, at their core, a refusal, a way of staying together on their own terms, rather than going out on God's. One language, unlimited cooperation, remarkable technology, and a shared determination to build something that would make them unforgettable and keep them from going where they had been sent. The building. Imagine the plain of Shinar during those days of construction. The kilns burning around the clock, turning raw clay into bricks by the tens of thousands. The supply chains, organized, efficient, running smoothly because everyone spoke the same language and understood every instruction the first time. No misunderstandings between the brickmakers and the carriers. No confusion between the architects and the laborers. Every person in the chain doing exactly what was needed, exactly when it was needed, in exactly the right way. The tower rising. Day by day, course by course of fired brick and bitumen climbing upward from the flat plain. A structure unlike anything that had been built before, because nothing like it had ever been attempted before. The people of Shinar were not limited by their resources. They were not limited by their technology. They were not limited by their numbers or their coordination. They were limited by nothing. And that, the Bible suggests, was precisely the point. The tower grew, the city spread around its base, streets and houses and markets and storehouses, all the infrastructure of permanent settlement, all of it humming with the energy of a people who had decided together that this was where they would be and this was what they would build, and no force on earth was going to stop them. No force on earth. God came down. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. God came down. The tower was built to reach the heavens, and God, the text says, came down to see it. There is something in that detail that has struck readers for thousands of years. The structure that was meant to reach up to God required God to come down to even see it. The gap between what human ambition could build and where God actually dwells was so vast that even their greatest achievement barely registered from above. But God saw it. And what he said when he saw it is one of the most extraordinary passages in all of Genesis. Not anger, not a decree of judgment handed down from a distance, something more like a calm, clear-eyed assessment. Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Listen that again slowly. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. God looked at what humanity had built with one language and unlimited cooperation, and acknowledged something remarkable. That they were right. That united in this way, with this shared framework of language and this capacity for coordination, there was genuinely no limit to what they could accomplish. This was not a statement made in fear. God does not fear human ambition, but it was a statement made with full understanding of what was happening and what would happen next if nothing changed. A humanity that refused to fill the earth, that turned its extraordinary God-given capacity for cooperation entirely toward its own glory and its own permanence, building higher and higher toward a heaven it was never meant to storm. This was not the direction the story was meant to go. And so, God acted. The scattering. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. The same construction as in the garden. Let us. The same deliberate, weighty decision, not a reflex, not a punishment delivered in anger, a considered response to what was unfolding on the plain below. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. The tower stopped. Not because the bricks ran out, not because the technology failed, not because the people lost the will to build, but because suddenly, in whatever moment it happened, the man passing bricks to the man above him said something, and the man above him looked down with an expression of complete incomprehension. The same sounds that had meant everything an hour ago meant nothing now.
Picture what that moment must have felt like. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-instruction, and the words land like noise, like sounds from an animal rather than a human being. The person you have been working beside for months, the person whose voice you know as well as your own family's, opens their mouth and produces something you have never heard before and cannot begin to decode. And they are looking at you with the same expression you are looking at them with: confusion. Then something more than confusion, something closer to fear. The unthinkable had happened. The one thing that had seemed permanent, the one thing no one had ever had reason to question, the foundation beneath every other foundation, was gone. The common tongue was gone. And without it, the cooperation dissolved. The supply chains broke down. The instructions could not be given and could not be received. The architects could not direct the laborers. The laborers could not coordinate with each other. The city that had been humming with unified purpose fell into a chaos of incomprehension. And the people did what people do when they cannot understand each other and cannot find common ground. They found the people who sounded like them. They grouped together by language, these new, sudden, inexplicable languages that had appeared from nowhere, and they moved away from the people who did not. The dispersion that they had built the city to prevent happened anyway. But now it happened faster and further, and with a fracture running through the human family that has never fully healed. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Babel, from the Hebrew word for confusion. The city that was meant to make a name, made a name, just not the one its builders intended. What remained? The tower stood for a while, presumably, half finished. The bricks still fired and strong, the bitumen still binding them together. But no one was adding to it anymore. The workers had scattered. The architects had gone with people who spoke their new language. The plain of Shinar was quieter now than it had been in a long time. The city remained, too. Babel, which would later become Babylon, one of the great cities of the ancient world, a name that would echo through the rest of the Bible, through the prophets, through the exile, through the book of Revelation thousands of years later, always carrying with it the memory of what had been attempted there, always carrying the weight of human ambition turned inward, building upward, reaching for what was never meant to be grasped. And the people spread into the territories that the 10th chapter of Genesis had already sketched out for them, each group with its new language, its new identity, its new sense of itself as distinct from all the others. What had been one people became many peoples. What had been one tongue became the 10,000 languages of the world. The earth was filled as God had said it would be, just not in the way the builders of Babel had planned. Sit with this story before sleep comes. The people of Babel were not evil in the way Cain was evil, or in the way the generation before the flood was evil. They were builders, organizers, people who looked at a flat plain and saw possibility, people who understood the power of unity and cooperation and decided to use it. And yet something in what they were building was wrong.
Not the bricks, not the city, not even the tower itself, but the direction, the inwardness, the decision to pour all of that extraordinary human capacity, that remarkable God-given ability to think and create and cooperate entirely into their own name, their own permanence, their own refusal to go where they had been sent. Was it pride? Was it fear? Was it simply the most human of impulses, to stay together, to be remembered, to build something that lasts? And here is the question worth carrying into the dark. If they had used that same unity, that same language, that same unlimited cooperation in a different direction, toward a different purpose, what might they have built instead? In the next episode, we leave the plains of Shinar and travel to a city called Ur. A man living there has no children, no promise, no reason to expect that anything is about to change. And then God speaks to him out of nowhere. No burning bush, no angels, no signs, just a voice, and one impossible instruction. Leave everything you have ever known and go to a land I will show you. His name is Abram, and what God promises him on that day will set in motion a story that runs through the rest of the entire Bible.
The world had changed. After the flood, after the plain of Shinar, after the languages split and the people scattered, the earth was filling again. Slowly, stubbornly, the way the earth always fills. New settlements in new territories, new names for new peoples, new gods for new cities. And there were many gods by now. The world that Noah's descendants had built was not a world that remembered the one who had closed the door of the ark from the outside. It was a world of many voices, many altars, many stories about where the sky came from and who had made the rivers and what the stars meant. The knowledge of God had not disappeared entirely. It had diluted, fragmented, mixed with other things until it was hard to find the original underneath. Into this world, into a city called Ur in the land of the Chaldeans on the banks of the great river, a man named Abram was living his life. We don't know what he looked like. We don't know what he did in the mornings or how he spent his evenings. We don't know if he was rich or poor at this point, influential or obscure. The Bible gives us almost nothing about his early life. What it does tell us, quietly, almost in passing, is two things that matter enormously.
The first, his father's name was Terah, and Terah had decided at some point to leave Ur. He gathered his household, Abram and Abram's wife Sarai and Abram's nephew Lot, and set out for the land of Canaan. They travelled as far as a place called Haran, and there, for reasons the Bible does not explain, they stopped. And Terah died in Haran. He was 205 years old. The second thing, Sarai, Abram's wife, was barren. She had no child. 2 sentences. And in those 2 sentences, the entire tension of everything that follows. A man whose family had started toward a destination and stopped short. A man with no children, no heir, no continuation of his name beyond himself. A man in the middle of a journey that had been abandoned, in a world full of gods that were not God, with a wife who could not give him what every man in that world considered the most essential thing a life could contain. This is the man God chose to speak to. The voice in Haran. There is no burning bush in this story, no angel standing in the road, no dream in the night with an interpreter standing by. The Bible simply says that God spoke to Abram, and what he said changed the direction of human history. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. That is the instruction. Leave. Leave your country. Leave your people. Leave your father's house. Go to a land that, and this is the part that requires something extraordinary, I will show you. Not, go to this place with this name at these coordinates. Go, and I will show you when you get there. It is one of the most open-ended instructions ever given. There is no map, no timeline, no description of the destination. Just go, in a direction I will point you as you walk. And then God added something to that instruction. 5 promises, stacked one on top of another like the courses of a building going up. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. A great nation from a man with no children. A great name from a man living in someone else's city. A blessing to all the families of the earth, from a man who had, as far as we know, given the world nothing yet. The promises were enormous, wildly, almost absurdly enormous, given the circumstances. A barren wife and an abandoned journey, and a man past the age when such things still seem possible. And God says, a great nation. All the families of the earth. The gap between the promise and the reality on the ground was vast enough to swallow a person's faith entirely. Abram went. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. That is the entire sentence. No recorded deliberation. No conversation with Sarai about whether this was wise. No asking God for more details or a clearer map, or at least a name for the destination. God spoke, and Abram went. He was 75 years old. The journey. He took Sarai, his wife. He took Lot, his nephew. He took all the possessions they had gathered and all the people who had joined their household in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan. Think about what that journey looked like. Not a quiet walk down a familiar road, a full migration. Servants, animals, tents, supplies for an unknown length of travel toward an unknown destination. Everything they owned loaded onto the backs of animals or carried in their arms. The city of Haran growing smaller behind them. The road ahead becoming unfamiliar, and then foreign, and then entirely new. And Abram at the front of all of it, 75 years old, with a barren wife and a nephew, and a word from God, and nothing else. Walking toward a land he would recognize only when God told him he had arrived. They came to the land of Canaan, And God appeared to Abram there at a place called Shechem, beside an oak tree, and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." And Abram built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. His first act upon arriving in the land of promise was the same as Noah's first act on dry ground: worship, not shelter, not a survey of the territory, an altar. Then he moved on, to the hill country east of Bethel. He pitched his tent there, Bethel on the west, Ai on the east, and built another altar and called upon the name of the Lord. Then he journeyed on, still going south, moving through the land that had been promised to his offspring, a stranger in every place he stopped. The famine. But the land of promise did not welcome him with abundance. There was a famine in the land. This is the kind of detail that stops you. God had brought Abram to this specific land, had promised it to his offspring, had appeared to him here, and the first thing the land produced was a famine. Not provision, not abundance, hunger. And Abram did what people do when the land cannot feed them. He went down to Egypt. Egypt in those days was the great, ancient, powerful civilization that sat at the edge of the known world, fed by the Nile even when the rains failed everywhere else. It was the place you went when the land could not sustain you. It was not the promised land. It was the practical solution. As they were about to enter Egypt, Abram said something to Sarai that reveals the fear underneath the faith. "I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your account." It is a startling moment. The man who had walked away from everything at God's word, now at the border of Egypt, afraid for his life. And his solution was not to pray, not to trust the God who had spoken to him at Shechem. His solution was a half-truth. Sarai was his half-sister. The Bible confirms this later. But in this context, calling her his sister rather than his wife was a deception designed to protect himself at her expense. This is one of the things the Bible does that no other ancient text does quite so honestly. It does not make its heroes into something they were not. Abram, the man God had chosen, the man who had left everything at a word, was also a man capable of fear, of calculation, of choices that were not noble. The Bible shows both, without apology. Egypt. They entered Egypt, and exactly what Abram had feared happened. The Egyptians saw Sarai, and they saw that she was beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's house. And Pharaoh treated Abram well for her sake. Abram received sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male servants and female donkeys and camels. He was enriched, materially, substantially, because of the woman he had placed in danger. But God afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go."
There is something quietly remarkable about this scene. Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the known world, the ruler of Egypt, is the one speaking truthfully here. He is the one who has been wronged. He returns Sarai to her husband and sends them away. And Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, back toward the land of Canaan, back toward the south, back toward Bethel, back toward the place between Bethel and Ai, where he had pitched his tent before, and built his altar, and called upon the name of the Lord. He went back to the beginning. Abram and Lot. Abram was very rich now, rich in livestock, in silver, in gold. The wealth of Egypt had come with him. And Lot, who travelled with him, also had flocks and herds and tents. And the land could not support both of them dwelling together. There was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. In a land where water and pasture were limited, two large households competing for the same resources, this was inevitable. It was not a dramatic falling out. It was the slow, grinding friction of two growing households in a land that had enough for one. Abram came to Lot and said something that revealed the generosity at the core of the man. "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. The whole land before you. You choose first." Abram, the elder, the one to whom the land had been promised, the one with the greater claim, offered Lot the first choice. Lot lifted up his eyes. He saw the Jordan Valley, all of it well watered, everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. It was the best land visible from where they stood, green and abundant and fed by water. Lot chose the Jordan Valley. He journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan. Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. The Bible adds a note here, quietly, almost as an aside, that the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Just a note, a detail filed away. The kind of sentence that seems small when you first read it, but that you remember later. The promise renewed. After Lot had separated from him, God spoke to Abram again. "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you, and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." Lift up your eyes. The same movement Lot had made, lifting his eyes and seeing the Jordan Valley and choosing it for himself. Now God told Abram to lift his eyes and see everything. North, south, east, west, all of it. Not just the well-watered valley that someone else had already taken. All the land in every direction, as far as the eye could reach. And offspring like the dust of the earth, innumerable, beyond counting, from a man with no children, from a man whose wife was barren, from a man
who had just watched his nephew walk away toward the best-looking land and had let him go without argument. God said, "All of this is yours, and your offspring will be beyond counting." Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Another altar, another act of worship in a place that was not yet his, in a land full of people who did not know his God, standing on a promise that had not yet produced a single child. Abram was 75 years old when he left. He had no map, no destination, no children, and a wife who had never been able to conceive. And he went anyway. What does it feel like to walk towards something you cannot see, on the strength of a voice you cannot prove to anyone else? To leave everything familiar, your country, your people, your father's house, for a land that will be pointed out to you as you go. And that choice at the fork in the road, letting Lot take the best land without argument, without resentment, without keeping score. Was that faith, generosity, or simply the quiet confidence of a man who believed that what God had promised could not be taken by someone else choosing first? The promises were enormous. The circumstances were impossible. And Abram kept building altars. In the next episode, the story deepens. God makes a formal covenant with Abram, the kind sealed with fire and sacrifice. 3 mysterious visitors arrive at his tent in the heat of the day. And on a plain, not far from where Lot had pitched his tent, 2 cities that had been building toward judgment for a long time finally reach it.
The War of Kings. Lot had chosen well, or so it had seemed. When he lifted his eyes from the hill country and saw the Jordan Valley stretched out before him, green, well-watered, abundant, he had made what looked like the obvious decision. The best land taken first. While his uncle Abram settled in the rocky hills of Canaan, Lot pitched his tent in the valley and moved toward a city called Sodom. It had looked like wisdom. It had looked like prosperity. But the valley of the Jordan was not simply a place of abundance. It was also a place of politics, of alliances and rivalries, and the slow, grinding machinery of power that operates beneath the surface of any prosperous region. And Lot, in choosing the best land, had chosen to live inside that machinery, without fully understanding what it would cost him when it finally moved. It was about to move. 12 years of submission. For 12 years, the cities of the Jordan Valley had served a king named Kedorlaomer. The Bible names him as king of Elam, a powerful kingdom to the east. And under his dominion, 5 cities of the valley paid tribute year after year: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, also called Zoar. 5 kings, 5 cities, all of them subject to Kedorlaomer and his allies. For 12 years they paid. They sent what was demanded. They kept their heads down and their borders open and their tribute regular. And then, in the 13th year, they rebelled. One word: rebelled. The Bible doesn't tell us what sparked it, whether it was a particularly heavy demand, or a new king in one of the cities who decided enough was enough, or simply the slow accumulation of 12 years of resentment finally reaching a breaking point. Whatever the reason,
In the 13th year, the 5 kings of the valley refused to pay. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer came to collect. The coalition of the East. He did not come alone. Chedorlaomer came with 3 allied kings: Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, and Tidal, king of Goim. 4 kings against 5. An alliance from the east marching west, cutting a path of conquest through the region before turning toward the Jordan Valley. The Bible traces their route with the precision of a military record. They struck the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Shava Kiriathaim. They defeated the Horites in their hill country of Seir as far as El Paran. They turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is, Kadesh, and struck the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites, who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Name after name, place after place, a systematic campaign sweeping through the region, removing every potential source of resistance before closing in on the valley. The 5 kings of the valley came out to meet them. They assembled their forces in the valley of Siddim, the valley full of bitumen pits, that same rich, fertile ground that had drawn Lot and so many others to settle there. And they formed their battle lines. The battle did not go well for the valley. The defeat. Chedorlaomer and his 3 allied kings, 4 kings against 5, won. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some of their men fell into the bitumen pits that dotted the valley floor. Others fled to the hill country. The victorious Eastern coalition moved through the defeated cities, taking everything. All the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, all their food, everything, and the people. Among the people taken, among the captives marched away from the smoldering ruins of a city that had seemed so prosperous, so well situated, so worth choosing, was Lot, Abram's nephew, the man who had lifted his eyes and seen the best land and taken it. He was gone, a captive, being marched east with everything he owned, away from the valley he had chosen and toward a future that had nothing to do with any choice he had made. The messenger. One man escaped. The Bible identifies him simply as someone who had escaped, and he came to Abram the Hebrew. Abram was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were men who were in covenant with Abram, allies, neighbors, part of the network of relationships he had built in the years since arriving in Canaan. The escaped man told Abram what had happened. Chedorlaomer, the battle, the defeat of the 5 kings, the taking of Sodom, and Lot, his brother's son, taken captive. The Bible records Abram's response without drama or deliberation. He acted. 318 men. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. 318 men. Not an army in the conventional sense. Not a professional military force with commanders and supply lines and siege equipment. These were the men of Abram's household, servants born into his service, trained for exactly this kind of situation. In the ancient world, a wealthy man's household was also his militia. These men had grown up under Abram's roof. They knew how to fight. But 318 men against a coalition that had just defeated 5 kings and their armies. Think about what Abram was choosing to do. Chedorlaomer had swept through the entire region. He had beaten everyone who had tried to stand against him. His campaign had been methodical, overwhelming, total. And Abram, a man whose primary identity in the text up to this point has been as a wandering herdsman, a man of tents and flocks and altars, was going to chase him down with 318 household servants. He went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, him and his servants, and struck them, and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. A night raid. Divided forces striking from multiple directions in the darkness. Confusion, speed, surprise. The kind of tactics that a smaller force uses against a larger one when it cannot win in open battle. And it worked. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. All the possessions, all the people. Lot, alive, free, returned from captivity. The women, everyone the Eastern Coalition had taken from the valley. Abram had done what 5 kings with their combined armies had failed to do. He had taken on the victors of the entire regional campaign, and won. The Valley of Shaveh. After the victory, after the long march back through the night, through the hill country, back toward Canaan with the recovered captives and the recovered goods, 2 kings came out to meet Abram in the Valley of Shaveh, which is the King's Valley. The first was the king of Sodom. He had survived the battle by fleeing. His city had been sacked, his people taken, his possessions stripped. And now the man who had recovered everything was returning. The king of Sodom came out to meet him. But before the king of Sodom could speak, before whatever transaction he had come to propose could take place, someone else appeared. The Bible does not answer these questions. It simply presents Melchizedek. Suddenly, without introduction, without genealogy, without explanation, standing in the King's Valley with bread and wine, blessing the man who had just returned from battle. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. 2 blessings, one for Abram, one for God. The priest of Salem standing between the 2, speaking words that acknowledged what had really happened in the darkness north of Damascus. It had not been 318 trained servants who had defeated Kedorlaomer's coalition. God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, had delivered the enemies into Abram's hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. A tithe. The first tithe recorded in the Bible. From the victorious warrior to the mysterious priest, 1/10 of all the recovered spoils, freely given before any other transaction had taken place. Melchizedek. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Salem, the city that would later be known as Jerusalem. And Melchizedek, whose name means in the Hebrew, King of Righteousness, was its king. But he was not only its king, he was also a priest. Priest of God Most High, El Elyon, the highest name for God available in that language, in that world. Who was this man? Where had he come from? How was it that in a world full of gods that were not God, in a land that Abram had entered as a stranger, there was a king and priest who served the same God that Abram served, the king of Sodom's offer? Then the king of Sodom spoke. "Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself." It was a reasonable offer. The people of Sodom were his subjects. He wanted them back. The goods were the spoils of war. Abram had won them and was entitled to keep them. By the conventions of the ancient world, this was a generous arrangement. Abram could walk away from this battle significantly wealthier than he had entered it. Abram's answer was immediate, and it was not what the king of Sodom expected. "I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.'" Not a thread, not a sandal strap, nothing. Abram had made an oath to the same God whose name Melchizedek had just spoken, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that he would take nothing from the king of Sodom. Whatever Abram had, whatever wealth he carried, whatever future came to him, it would not come from the king of Sodom. It would not come from this city, this valley, this world that had chosen its own gods and its own ways. If God had promised to make Abram's name great, then God would do it, not the king of Sodom. He asked only that his allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, the men who had fought beside him, be allowed to take their share, their choice, not his to make for them. And that was it. The recovered goods returned to Sodom. The people returned to their city. Lot, we can assume, returned to his tent in the valley, to the life he had chosen, to the city that the eastern kings had just sacked, and that God had just, through Abram, returned to him. Whether Lot understood what had just happened, what it had cost, who had paid it, and what it said about the uncle he had separated from on a hillside not so long ago, the Bible does not say. 318 men against a coalition that had just defeated the armies of 5 cities. A night raid in unfamiliar territory, deep in the aftermath of a war Abram had nothing to do with, except that his nephew was somewhere in the middle of it. He didn't hesitate. He didn't calculate the odds. He heard that Lot had been taken, the same Lot who had chosen the best land and walked away. And he went. And then, at the moment of victory, when the king of Sodom offered him everything he was entitled to, he took nothing. Not a thread, not a sandal strap. What does it mean to trust a promise enough to refuse everything that isn't it? And that figure in the valley, Melchizedek, appearing from nowhere with bread and wine and a blessing. Who was he really? The Bible will return to his name centuries later, in ways no one standing in the King's Valley that day could have anticipated. In the next episode, the promises become a covenant. God speaks to Abram in a vision, and Abram asks the question that has been underneath everything from the beginning. How can I know? And God answers in a way that no one has ever seen before or since. A deep sleep falls, darkness descends, and something passes between the divided pieces of a sacrifice that will seal what God has promised forever. After the battle was over, after the king of Sodom had taken his people and gone, after Melchizedek had disappeared back into Salem as quietly as he had come, after the last of the recovered goods had been sorted and the last of the 318 men had returned to their tents, the valley was quiet again. And in that quiet, something settled over Abram that victories do not always prevent. A kind of stillness. The particular silence that comes after great exertion, when the body is at rest, but the mind is still moving through everything that has just happened, turning it over, examining it from different angles. He had won. He had rescued Lot. He had refused the king of Sodom's wealth and walked away with nothing but the knowledge that he had done what needed to be done. And the promises of God, the great nation, the offspring like the dust of the earth, the land in every direction as far as the eye could see, were still exactly as they had been before the battle. Enormous, unfulfilled, waiting. It was after these things that God spoke to Abram in a vision. "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." And Abram, the man who had left everything at a word, who had built altars at every place he stopped, who had refused a king's ransom rather than let anyone other than God be credited with his wealth, said something that had clearly been sitting inside him for a long time. "O Lord God, what will you give me, for I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" It was not a complaint exactly. It was not rebellion or doubt in the way we might use those words. It was the honest voice of a man who had been carrying a promise for years, and who was beginning to feel the weight of the distance between what had been said and what he could see. He had no child. His heir, the one who would inherit everything he had built, was a servant. A good man, presumably, a trusted man, but not a son, not what had been promised. "Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir." He said it plainly, without decoration. This is the reality. This is what I see when I look at my life. You promised a great nation, and I have no child. And God brought him outside. "Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. So shall your offspring be." The stars. On a clear night in the ancient desert, far from any city light, the sky above Canaan would have been staggering. Not dozens of stars, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands, layer upon layer, the Milky Way stretching from one horizon to the other like a river of light. Every direction, stars. More than could be counted, more than could be imagined, really, even standing there looking directly at them. So shall your offspring be. From a man with no children, from a man whose wife had never conceived, from a man who was now well past the age when such things happen naturally, your offspring will be like that, like the stars you cannot count. And then the Bible says something simple and immeasurable. "And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness." He believed. Standing under an uncountable sky, with no evidence except a voice and a promise, he believed. And that belief, that trust in the face of everything that made it unreasonable, God counted it as righteousness. Not Abram's perfect obedience, not his flawless record, his belief, his willingness to trust what he could not yet see. It is one of the most quietly revolutionary sentences in the entire Bible. Then God spoke again. And what he said next was not another promise spoken into the air. It was an invitation to something more formal, more binding. An ancient ceremony that everyone in Abram's world would have understood immediately. A covenant, sealed not with words, but with blood and fire. Bring me a heifer, 3 years old, a female goat, 3 years old, a ram, 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Abram brought them. He cut each animal in half and laid each half opposite the other, forming 2 rows with a path between them. The birds he did not cut. And he sat beside the divided pieces and waited. Birds of prey came down on the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. He sat there through the heat of the day, keeping watch over the covenant that had not yet been sealed, driving away the birds that wanted to take what had been prepared. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and with the sleep came darkness, not the ordinary darkness of night, but something heavier, denser, a darkness full of presence, a dread, the kind that precedes something enormous. And in that darkness, God spoke to him about what was coming, not just for Abram himself, but for his descendants, things that were not yet and would not be for 400 years, a time of slavery in a foreign land, of oppression and suffering, and then deliverance, and then return. God laid out the shape of centuries in the darkness of that deep sleep, speaking to one man about what would happen to a nation that did not yet exist. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, something passed between the pieces. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch. Moving through the path between the divided animals, where in a normal covenant ceremony both parties would walk between the pieces, binding themselves to the terms, declaring by that walk that what had happened to these animals should happen to them if they broke the agreement. Here, only one party walked. The fire, the smoke. God alone moving through the covenant. This was not a mutual agreement between equals. This was God binding himself to a promise, taking the full weight of the covenant onto himself. If this fails, the fire said, it will not be because I did not hold my end. I am walking through these pieces alone. This promise rests on me. To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The land, defined now with borders, from Egypt to the Euphrates. Everything between those 2 great rivers, all of it promised to the offspring of a man who still had no child. Time passed after the covenant of fire. The Bible does not say exactly how much, but enough for the silence around the promise to grow louder again. Sarai had still not conceived, and Sarai, who had been watching the years pass with the same quiet accumulation of hope and disappointment that Abram carried, arrived at a decision. It was not an unusual decision for her world. It was, in fact, the conventional solution to exactly this kind of situation. She had an Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar, and she went to Abram and said, "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Hagar conceived. And the moment she knew she had conceived, something shifted between the two women. Hagar looked at her mistress with contempt. The servant who had been given to the master now carried what the mistress could not, and Sarai felt it. The contempt of a woman who had something Sarai did not. Sarai went to Abram, and her words carried the full weight of a woman in pain. "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me."
And Abram said, "She is your servant. Do with her as you please."
Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, and Hagar fled into the desert. She ran toward Shur, toward Egypt, toward home, toward the only direction that made sense when the life you had been placed into became unbearable. And in the desert, beside a spring of water, an angel of the Lord found her. He called her by name. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from my mistress." And the angel told her to return, to go back and submit. It was not a comfortable instruction, but it came with something attached to it, a promise of her own. Her offspring would be multiplied beyond counting. She would bear a son, and his name would be Ishmael, meaning God hears, because the Lord had listened to her affliction. "You are a God of seeing," she said, there beside the spring, and she named the well Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. She had been seen. In the desert, alone, fleeing, carrying a child that had become the source of conflict rather than joy, she had been found and named and given a promise. Hagar returned, and she bore Abram a son, and Abram called his name Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old.
13 years passed. 13 years of silence from God. 13 years of Ishmael growing up in Abram's household, learning to walk, and then to run, and then to be the son that his father had no other son to be. 13 years of ordinary life, tents and flocks, and the slow rhythms of a nomadic household in the hill country of Canaan. And then, when Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again. "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly." And Abram fell on his face. God spoke to him and said, "I am changing your name. No longer Abram, exalted father, but Abraham, father of a multitude, because that is what you will be. Father of a multitude of nations. Kings will come from you, and I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession." And then God said something about Sarai. Her name too was changing. No longer Sarai, but Sarah. And she would bear Abraham a son of her own body. And that son, not Ishmael, but this son not yet born, would be the one through whom the covenant would continue. Abraham fell on his face and laughed. Not the laugh of mockery, not dismissal, but the laugh that comes when something is so far beyond what seems possible that the only honest response is laughter. He was 99. Sarah was 89.
Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And then he said, the words of a man who loved the son he had. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. God heard that. He said, I have blessed Ishmael. He will be fruitful. 12 princes will come from him, a great nation. But the covenant, the specific carrying covenant, will be established with the son Sarah will bear. His name will be Isaac, and Sarah will bear him by this time next year. When God finished speaking, he went up from Abraham, and Abraham took Ishmael and every male in his household and circumcised them that same day, every male, the sign of the covenant cut into the flesh of everyone who belonged to Abraham's household on the very day God had spoken. He was 99 years old. God walked alone between the pieces of that covenant, not asking Abraham to walk with him, not making it a mutual agreement, taking the entire weight of the promise onto himself alone, as if to say, this does not depend on you, it depends on me. And then 13 years of silence. 13 years in which the only son in the tent was Ishmael, the son of a solution that Abraham and Sarah had invented themselves when the waiting became too long. What does it feel like to wait 13 years for a promise? To watch a child grow up who is beloved and real and present, while the promised child remains a name spoken once in a vision beside an uncountable sky. And Sarah, whose name had just been changed, whose body had never conceived, who was 89 years old, would bear a son within the year. Some things have to become completely impossible before they can happen. In the next episode, 3 strangers arrive at Abraham's tent in the heat of the day. He runs to meet them. He feeds them. And one of them says something that someone inside the tent overhears, and her response is the most human moment in the entire story of Abraham. Then those same visitors turn toward the valley, toward the cities that have been named in this story more than once, always with the same quiet note attached. The men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The reckoning that has been building since Lot lifted his eyes and chose the valley is almost here. There are moments in a person's life that begin like any other moment and end by changing everything. Not the moments you prepare for, not the ones you see coming from a distance, the ones you have time to brace yourself against. Those moments are hard enough, but they come with warning. They give you time to arrange your face, to steady your breathing, to become the version of yourself you want to be when the thing arrives. No. The moments that change everything are the ones that find you exactly as you are. In the middle of an ordinary day, doing nothing remarkable, sitting in the shade because the heat is too heavy for anything else. This one began with heat, the kind of heat that settles over the desert at midday like a physical weight pressing down from above. The kind that empties the roads and silences the camps and drives every living creature, man and animal alike, into whatever shadow it can find. The air above the ground shimmers and ripples as if the earth itself is breathing. The horizon dissolves into a pale blur where the sky and the sand become the same color. Sound travels strangely in that heat, or doesn't travel at all. The world contracts to the small circle of shade beneath whatever is overhead, and everything outside that circle feels very far away and not quite real. Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent by the oaks of Mamre. He was 99 years old. The oaks of Mamre were old too, ancient trees whose roots reached deep enough to find water even in the worst of the dry season, whose canopies spread wide enough to offer real shade to anyone who sat beneath them. This was where Abraham had pitched his tent. This was where he had built his altar. This was where he had lived in the years since the covenant of fire, the years of waiting, the years of Ishmael growing tall and strong in the camp, the years of Sarah's face when she thought no one was watching. 99 years old. A son promised within the year. The most impossible thing he had ever been told, spoken in the most matter-of-fact possible way by the same voice that had told him to leave Ur all those decades ago. He had fallen on his face and laughed when he heard it. Not mockery, just the honest, involuntary response of a man who understood the arithmetic of the situation and could not quite make it add up. He was sitting in the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, resting perhaps, thinking perhaps, doing the particular kind of nothing that the worst heat of a desert afternoon imposes on everyone equally, the young and the old, the faithful and the faithless, the man who had walked with God for decades and the man who had never thought about God at all. And then Abraham looked up. 3 men were standing in front of him. He had not heard them approach. There had been no sound of footsteps on the dry, cracked ground, the kind of sound that carries clearly in the stillness of midday heat. There had been no distant shape resolving slowly out of the heat haze, growing larger as it came nearer, the way travellers do when you watch them come across open ground. They were simply there, present, standing before him in the full blaze of noon, as if they had always been standing there and he had only just noticed. Something moved in Abraham in that moment, something that bypassed thought and went straight to action. He did not sit and consider who they might be, or where they had come from, or what they might want. He did not call for a servant to go and ask. He rose, and then he ran. The text says ran. This 99-year-old man, in the heat of the day, ran from the tent entrance to meet them. And when he reached them, he bowed himself to the earth, the full bow of the ancient world, a gesture of profound respect and welcome. And he said, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." A morsel of bread, a little water, the language of understatement that the ancient world used when it meant to offer everything. What Abraham actually did was something else entirely. He went into the tent to Sarah, moving quickly, with urgency, and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour. Knead it and make cakes." 3 seahs was not a small amount. It was enough flour to make bread for a feast, enough to feed many people well. And that was only the bread. He ran to the herd, ran again, this old man running in the heat, and he himself chose the calf. Not a servant sent to find something adequate. Abraham himself, going into the herd, looking at the animals, selecting the one that was tender and good. He gave it to a young man, who set about preparing it quickly, with the urgency that the host's manner communicated without words. And then Abraham stood beside them under the tree while they ate, the posture of a servant waiting on guests, the host making himself available, present, attentive, ready to bring more water if the cup needed refilling, ready to answer if a question was asked, simply there, in the way a good host is there. 3 strangers arrived without warning at the worst hour of the day, from a direction that had offered no warning of their coming, and Abraham had treated them as if they were the most important guests who had ever come to his tent. They ate. The calf, the bread, the curds and milk. They ate in the shade of the ancient oaks, while the heat of the day pressed down on everything around them. And when they had finished, one of them asked a question. It was a simple question, the kind a guest might ask out of polite interest. But the way it was asked, the precision of it, the particular way the name was spoken, carried something underneath it that a simple question of polite interest does not usually carry. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Not, "Do you have a wife?" Not, "What is her name?" "Where is Sarah, your wife?" As if the name was already known, as if the question was not really a question about location, but about something else. Abraham said, "She is there, in the tent." And the voice said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Sarah was listening. The text notes it the way you note a detail that is going to matter. The entrance was behind him, and Sarah was there at the tent entrance, and she heard. She was listening from just inside the fabric of the tent, in the thin strip of shade and shadow between the inside and the outside, close enough to hear everything and hidden enough to be, technically, somewhere else. She was very old. Abraham was very old. The years had moved through her body the way years move through every body, slowly at first, then all at once. She had been barren her whole life. The particular grief of that, the particular shape of a life lived without the child that everyone around you assumes is coming, the child that defines what a woman is in the world you live in, had been part of her since before she can remember in the story. And now she was 89. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah long ago. That door, if it had ever been open, was closed in every way that a body can close a door. And she heard, "Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." She laughed, not out loud, inside. A private laugh, the kind that escapes before you can stop it, that involuntary, internal sound that the body makes when something strikes it as so far beyond the edge of possible that the only honest response is to laugh. She laughed to herself and thought, "After I am worn out and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" It was an honest thought. It was the thought of a woman who had lived in her body for 89 years and knew what it could and could not do. It was the thought of a woman who had waited a very long time for a promise that had not arrived, and who had, perhaps, somewhere along the way, made her peace with the waiting by deciding that peace was the same as giving up. And the voice said to Abraham, not to Sarah, to Abraham, as if addressing the invisible audience she thought she was. Why did Sarah laugh? The question moved through the tent fabric as clearly as if there were no fabric there. She was found. The private laugh, the internal surrender to impossibility, the thought she had thought in the privacy of her own mind, heard. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Not said as a rebuke exactly, said as a question, the kind of question that is also a statement, the kind that doesn't require an answer because the answer is already obvious to everyone in the conversation. A question that simply holds up a mirror and lets you see what you've been assuming. Sarah was afraid then. She denied it. I did not laugh. He said, no, but you did laugh. 3 words. Calm, certain. Not angry, just true. The laugh had been heard. The door she had privately closed had been noted, and the promise had been restated anyway, not modified, not conditional on her faith being perfect, not withdrawn because she had laughed. The same promise, the same time, the same certainty. Sarah shall have a son. The 3 visitors rose to leave. Abraham walked with them, the ancient gesture of honor, the host accompanying his guests to the road, making sure they knew they were valued until the last possible moment. They walked together toward the edge of the hill country, toward the place where the land opens up and you can look down into the valley below. And as they walked, something changed. One of the visitors spoke, and what he said was not quite addressed to Abraham and not quite addressed to anyone else, but seemed to arrive in the space between them as if Abraham was meant to hear it without being spoken to directly. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. And then turned outward toward the valley below. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. The 2 other visitors turned. They walked away down the road toward the valley, toward Sodom, toward the cities on the plain that had been named in this story before, always with the same quiet notation attached to them like a shadow. The men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Lot was living there. The valley that had looked like the garden of the Lord was down there below the hill in the late afternoon light, and Abraham remained standing before the Lord. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary exchanges in the entire Bible, not because of what it reveals about Sodom, but because of what it reveals about Abraham, and about the kind of relationship that had grown between this man and God over the decades since a voice had found him in Haran and told him to go. He began to speak. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He was negotiating with God on behalf of a city that was not his, full of people he had no particular obligation to, not demanding, not accusing, negotiating, the way a man negotiates when he has a relationship with the person across from him, when he knows the other party well enough to make an argument and expect it to be heard. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? It was an appeal to God's own character. You are the judge. Justice is what you do, and justice does not put the righteous to death with the wicked. The Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous in Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham took a breath. "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes." He knew what he was doing. He knew the gap between himself and the one he was speaking to. Dust and ashes, the most honest assessment of what a human being is in the face of the eternal. And knowing it, naming it, he kept going anyway. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? He said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." 45. Abraham let that settle for a moment. Suppose 40 are found there. He said, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He said, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He said, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He said, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking with Abraham. 10. The number had come down from 50 to 10 in 6 careful steps. Each one offered with the same apology for the audacity of asking. Each one received and answered. Abraham had walked the negotiation as far as he dared. He stopped at 10, perhaps because he thought 10 was a safe number, surely a reachable number, a number so small that any city of real size should be able to produce it without difficulty. 10 righteous people in all of Sodom. He turned and went back to his place. The 2 visitors arrived at the gates of Sodom in the evening. Evening in an ancient city is a particular kind of time. The heat of the day has begun to release its grip. The gates, which have been open since dawn, are about to close for the night. People are moving, coming in from fields and pastures, heading home, gathering at the gate the way people gather in the last light of the day, because the gate is where the social life of the city happens, where news arrives and business is conducted, and disputes are settled by the elders who sit there. Lot was sitting at the gate. He had been in Sodom long enough now to be one of the people who sat at the gate, which meant he was a man of standing, a man of community, a man who had built a life inside these walls. He looked up and saw 2 strangers, and something in him responded the way Abraham had responded on the hill. immediately, physically, with the urgency of a man who understands more than he could explain. He rose. He bowed himself with his face to the earth. He said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." They said it simply, without elaboration, perhaps testing something, perhaps giving Lot a choice, the choice to insist or to accept. Lot pressed them strongly. He would not let them stay in the square. Whatever he knew about his city, whatever he had seen in the years of living inside its gates, he would not let these two strangers spend the night in the open. He brought them to his house. He made them a feast, unleavened bread quickly prepared, the meal of a man who wanted his guests fed and settled and safe before the night deepened. Before they lay down, before the lamps were extinguished and the house settled into the quiet of night, the city found them. The men of Sodom surrounded the house. The text does not allow for ambiguity about this. It does not say some of the men, or a group, or many. It says, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, every male in the city, from the youngest to the oldest, surrounding the house of Lot in the darkness, pressing in from every direction, their voices rising in the night air with a demand that made the nature of the city's wickedness concrete and undeniable. "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Lot went out to them. He stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him, placing his body between the crowd and the door, between the strangers inside and the city outside. It was a gesture of protection that was also a gesture of exposure. He had made himself the single point of contact, the only thing between two people and an entire city. What he said in response was desperate and wrong in a way that the text does not excuse or explain. It simply records. He offered his daughters. Two young women, his own children, offered to a crowd in the darkness as a substitute for the guests he was protecting. The crowd was not interested. "Stand back. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." They pressed hard against Lot. They came near to break down the door. The sound of it, the weight of an entire city pushing against one door, one man in the darkness, is the sound of a place that has gone so far in a particular direction that there is no coming back. And then the two men inside reached out. They pulled Lot back through the door into the house. They struck the men at the entrance, every one of them, small and great, with blindness. Sudden, total, complete. The crowd that had been pushing and pressing and reaching for the door was suddenly groping in absolute darkness, unable to find what was directly in front of them. Wearing themselves out, searching for a door they could no longer see. The house was quiet, and in that quiet, the two visitors spoke to Lot with a directness that left no room for misunderstanding. "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Lot went out into the blinded city. He found the men who were pledged to marry his daughters, his sons-in-law, or the men who would be his sons-in-law, young men who had built their futures around the assumption that Sodom would be there to build them in. He said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." They looked at him. This man who had come to their door in the middle of the night, wide-eyed, urgent, speaking about destruction. This man who had been their future father-in-law, a respected man of the gate, now standing in the dark, saying things that made no sense. He seemed to them to be jesting. The text gives them no more than that. They thought he was joking. They did not come. Lot went back to his house, back to the visitors, back to the only safe place in a city that was laughing at the warning. When morning came, when the sky in the east began to lighten from black to deep blue to the first pale suggestion of gold, the two visitors became urgent in a way they had not been before. "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. Go, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." And Lot lingered. This is the detail that sits in the chest and stays there. The angels had told him the city was about to be destroyed. He had seen what they had done to the crowd outside his door, an entire city struck blind in an instant. He had gone to his sons-in-law with the warning and come back alone. His daughters were inside. His wife was inside. Everything he needed to survive was inside. And he lingered. Perhaps it was the weight of everything else, the house, the years, the possessions accumulated over a lifetime of living in this valley, in this city, behind these walls, the business connections, the social standing, the chair at the gate, the life that had seemed like wisdom when he lifted his eyes from the hilltop and chose the best land. All of it was here. All of it would be gone the moment he walked through the gate. He lingered. And then the 2 men, the text drops the word angel here, returns to the human word man, as if to emphasize the physical reality of what happened next, seized him by the hand, and his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters. The Lord being merciful to him, merciful to a man who was hesitating at the threshold of his own rescue, they brought them out by force. They took them by the hands, and they walked them out of the city, and they set them outside the walls. And one of them said, "Run. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Go to the hills. Run." Lot said, "Not the hills. I am afraid of the hills. What if something overtakes me there? Look, there is a small city, close enough to reach quickly. Let me go there. It is only a little city. Can't I go there? And my life will be saved." He said, "I have granted you this also. I will not overthrow the city you have spoken of, but hurry. Escape there quickly. I can do nothing until you arrive." Therefore the name of that city was called Zoar, the little one. Named in the moment of crisis, named for the smallness of the favor that was asked. Not the hills, just the little city, just the nearest thing, just the minimum that would count as safety. They ran. The sun was rising. The light was coming up hard and golden over the hills to the east, throwing long shadows westward across the valley, hitting the walls of Sodom at a low angle that made everything look, for a moment, almost beautiful. The city in the early morning, the gates, the streets still quiet before the day began, the life that was there, in that moment, still intact. Lot ran toward Zoar. His wife ran with him, and somewhere on the road between Sodom and Zoar, on the flat plain of the valley in the growing morning light, with the city still visible behind them and the little city still visible ahead, she looked back. Just that. She turned her head. She looked at what was behind her. One glance toward the city, toward the house, toward the years, toward everything that was ending in whatever way it was about to end. And she became a pillar of salt. She stands there, in the text, fixed forever in that moment. 1 foot forward, 1 foot still back, face turned toward what she could not leave behind. A woman caught between the life she was running toward and the life she could not stop looking at. The Bible does not give her name. She is Lot's wife. She is a pillar of salt. She is the image of a choice. The choice to look back at the thing you were told not to look at, to turn toward the thing you were running from, preserved in the landscape of the plain as a permanent reminder of what that choice looks like. Lot did not look back. He kept running. He arrived at Zoar as the sun was fully up. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The phrasing is worth sitting with. Sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Not a natural disaster reported neutrally, not an earthquake or a volcanic event described in the language of geology. Sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The source named, the agent identified, the act attributed to the one who had told Abraham the night before that the outcry was great and the sin was very grave. He overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. Everything. The valley that had looked like the garden of the Lord when Lot lifted his eyes from the hill and chose it. The well-watered plain, the cities with their walls and gates and markets and houses, the streets that had been full of noise just hours before, the crops in the fields, the animals in their enclosures, all of it, in whatever span of time fire falling from the sky takes to complete its work. Gone. 5 cities had stood in that valley. The names were known: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. The little one, spared at the last moment because a frightened man asked for the smallest possible favor on the road out of the fire. 4 cities destroyed. The valley that had seemed like the best possible choice, the valley that had drawn Lot and so many others with the promise of abundance, was smoke and ash, and the particular silence that comes after something absolute has happened. Abraham rose early that morning. He went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, the same hill, the same overlook, the same place where the conversation had happened, where he had walked the number down from 50 to 10, and then gone home, believing that 10 would be enough. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. The smoke was rising from the land like the smoke of a furnace. Everywhere he looked, smoke. The columns of it climbing into the morning sky, bending slightly in whatever wind was moving at that height, spreading out at the top the way smoke spreads when there is nothing to stop it. Below the smoke, nothing. Or rather, what was left after fire and sulfur had finished. He had asked for 10. 10 righteous people found in Sodom would have been enough to spare the city. He had walked the number down from 50 because he was afraid that 50 might be more than the city could produce. He had been trying to find the floor, the minimum, the smallest number that was still reachable. 10 had not been reachable. Abraham stood on the hill and looked at the smoke and understood, in the silence, what that meant. But the text, which has just described the total destruction of multiple cities and the death of every person in them, adds one more sentence. It comes quietly, almost gently, tucked in after the horror, like a hand placed on a shoulder. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. God remembered Abraham, the man who had stood on the hill the evening before and negotiated, who had walked the number down from 50 to 10 with the care and respect of a man who understood both the importance of what he was asking and the gap between himself and the one he was asking, who had gone home believing that surely 10 could be found. His prayer had not saved the city. The city was smoke. But his prayer had not been forgotten. Lot, the nephew who had chosen the best land and walked away, who had pitched his tent towards Sodom and then moved inside its gates, who had sat at its gate and become one of its men, walked out alive. Not because of his own righteousness, because God remembered the man who had asked.
Lot did not stay in Zoar. The Bible says he was afraid to stay in Zoar. Afraid of what exactly it does not say. Perhaps of the people there, strangers, people who did not know him, people who might have watched the smoke rising from the plain and drawn their own conclusions about the man who had arrived from that direction just as the fire started. Perhaps simply afraid, the way a person is afraid when the ground they trusted has turned out to be the kind of ground that burns. He went up out of Zoar and into the hills, the same hills he had been afraid of an hour before, the hills he had specifically asked to be spared from, the hills he had said he could not reach safely. Now he climbed them. Because Zoar, the little city he had begged for, no longer felt safe enough. He lived in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. His wife was a pillar of salt on the plain below. His sons-in-law were ash in the ruins of Sodom. His house was gone. His standing at the gate was gone. The years of building a life in the valley, the wealth and the community and the identity that came from being a man of the city, gone. All of it, in a single morning. He lived in a cave, and the Bible, which has been following Abraham for chapters now, with the promise and the covenant and the stars and the fire, lets Lot's story end here, in a cave in the hills, with 2 daughters and the smoke of the valley still visible in the distance. The man who had lifted his eyes and seen the best land and taken it, living in a cave in the hills above the place where the best land used to be. In the next episode, the impossible keeps happening. Sarah conceives. Isaac is born into a family that had stopped believing birth was possible. There is laughter again, but a different kind of laughter than the kind Sarah laughed in the tent. And then, when the son is old enough to walk beside his father up a mountain, God asks Abraham for something that seems to contradict everything he has ever promised. He asks for Isaac back.